such a pleasure to be here in this form. The last time the 7 of us were together, it was in person. But it's beautiful that the threads continue to weave a tapestry. And I am hoping that this session will maybe tie together a lot of what came from before. And as I mull over the past 6 episodes that we've had of phenomenal women, I realized that a core theme that has come up has been that of the feminine. But the feminine not as a gendered being, the feminine as a living world ethic, the feminine as nurturing, as relational, as intuitive, the feminine as embodied, as regenerative. We have seen and we have heard the critique on systems that are built on speed, systems built on competition and extraction and hierarchy. And we've seen and we've heard the propositions instead of moving a feminine architecture of care, an architecture of healing, and an ecological intelligence. Over the past 6 weeks or the 6 sessions, we've also looked into the future. And the future not as a techno-utopian or neoliberal state, but an ecological, human scale, and community-rooted place. It is a future of interdependence, not dominance. It centers localization, youth empowerment, food sovereignty, eco-pedagogy, and emotional restoration. And through the past 6 sessions, we've also touched a little bit onto Indigenous knowledge, where sometimes it's been implicit, but there's constant alignment with the notions of interconnectedness with nature, with reciprocity, with reverence for the land, with communal parenting, with eco-literacy, with wisdom transmitted through experience. We've heard about living alternatives to the dominant paradigm. We've heard about a quiet but persistent retrieval of ancestral and ecological memory. And we've heard, where did we go wrong? And what ancient and what feminine and what relational truths can guide us now? We've been through a session and a journey of healing by remembering, a journey of recovering the suppressed wisdom that generates life. And in this, I believe that the past 6 sessions have taken us into the heart of what I'll be speaking about, which is the heart of Ubuntu, the heart that tells us that I am because we are. I am because we are one in a collective. We are relational, we are cooperative, and therefore we are able to bring a spiritual invitation. So with that, I'd like to go into my topic today while honoring the 6 women who have gone before and bringing it into how then can we, today we talk about true progress and the restoration of the whole. And in doing this, we take a moment of co-reflection and co-imagination. And in this moment, we look into the future. What is the future that we wish to see? What would happen if we were to move towards an Ubuntu-centered progress and restoration of the whole? But I warn you that my journey will be chaotic because I generally follow the jagged road. And for that, I'd like to begin with following the way of the seer. And the seer is that which is bound in the cycles and spirals of time and timelessness. And in this time and timelessness, we may go into all that which tells us about Sankofa, the ability to go back into that which was before, bring it into the present in order to take it to a greater future. We realize when we follow the way of the seer that time is not linear. Time moves in multiple dimensions, and time moves into nothingness. Time moves into that which was before, and time moves into that which was never before. Time is that which may be illusionary at times, but at times it may be concrete. And so in this way, we're able to follow this way and know that the seer is present with us. And once we follow the way of the seer, perhaps we can follow the way of the weaver. And for that, I'd like to go into nature. And I'd love to go into one of my most greatest inspiration, which is a little bird called the weaver bird. And we know that this weaver, this feminine aspect of the weaver is very precise. She will watch the male building this nest, and if it is not built up to absolutely precise specifications, she will take it apart and let him begin it again, because it is necessary that we have precision in the place of femininity that allows the eggs to be held with utmost care. And that is how we weave tapestries with the feminine. And in this industrious precision, this feminine understands how to then consolidate if it is a place where we have limited resources. And when we have limited resources, this weaver becomes a communal weaver, where they bring together all the nests into a village, into a town, into a collective, where they can share the resources that are limited. And where there's extremely limited resources, as we see in the Kalahari Desert here, we have the social weaver building one big nest. And this is the way the feminine flows. They're able to mark with absolute precision, bring into the collective, and share resources where they are limited. And this brings us into the strands of sustainability. It is only through sharing that which is limited that we're able to be sustainable. And that little weaver bird shows coming forth from the principles of nature. And in our African traditions, we watch the weaver bird, and we watch how they weave these nests into being, and they weave metaphors into the tapestries that they weave with these nests. And those tapestries are then taken into here, what we have, these Tonga baskets from the Tonga people of Kasamambezi at the border between Zimbabwe and Zambia. And they're forever weaving fractals into these baskets, because fractals are those patterns inherent in nature that repeat themselves. It may be the pine cone, it may be the leaf on a tree, it may be the looking at broccoli and how it replicates itself. But these patterns also are replicated in how we do our hair. These patterns are replicated in the rituals that we go through in our everyday life. And so when our indigenous women are weaving these baskets, they're weaving them on the patterns of the cosmos. They're weaving them on the patterns of nature, and they're weaving them along the principles of the weaver bird. I have another inspiration, something that really gets my radiance going, and that is following the way of the river. And here we have elephants, the matriarchs here of Africa, who are constantly following this way in community, following this way with their little ones, following this way with the aunties, following this way in the way that they're going to train the bulls to become self-sufficient. But there are many rivers that we could talk about, and I particularly like the rivers of Africa. We have, for instance, the Nile River, which is the longest river in the world, which flows from the south all the way to the north. And in doing so, it happens to debunk a commonly understood myth of the dominant paradigm of modernity, that all development and all knowledge must flow from the north to the south. And this longest river in the world defies this. It moves from the south to the north. We also have in Africa the deepest and the most powerful river in the world, which is the Congo River. And the Congo arises in the deep wound of Africa. It arises in the Great East African Rift Valley, where the African continent is slowly rifting apart. And it is this slow rifting apart that makes it a very unstable place, full of volcanic activity, full of earthquake tectonic activity. And it is precisely because of this that this powerful river, the deepest river, is born, because we understand from an indigenous paradigm that it is from the places of deepest wounding and deepest what we call the cracks that we're able to find the deepest power and the greatest power. We also have in Africa the river with the largest curtain of water in the world, the Kasamambezi River, or in its adulterated form is the Zambezi River. And this river it arises in a miyombo tree, they say, in Zambia, in a flay. And then it moves through 6 countries before it eventually moves eastward and drains into the Indian Ocean. And in doing that, it carries with it great power in falling through the great curtain of water called Musiwatunga, the great waterfall that they call Victoria Falls. And that is a synonym for the great power that is inherent in the feminine. That is the river. But the river I'm really interested in talking about today is the Niger River. And the Niger River is in West Africa. The Niger River arises 240 kilometers from the ocean. And if it were to follow the course of the dominant paradigm, if it were to follow the course of a modern economics, if it were to follow the course of modern science, it would move the efficient route. It would move from the highlands, the Guinea Highlands, 240 kilometers from the Atlantic Ocean, and it would drain into the Atlantic Ocean, moving down a gradient, as science will tell us, is efficient. But this river, like the Nile River, which is defiant, like the Congo River, which is defiant, and like the Zambezi River, which is defiant in that it does not follow the principle of economics. Instead, it moves away from the river, from the ocean, and it moves into the other. It moves into the Sahara Desert. It moves into that which has no water. It moves into the other. It moves into that which is the exact opposite of what it is. And the science of linearity would tell us that, well, while it's moving in this direction, it might as well continue moving and drain into the Mediterranean Sea along with the Nile. But this river defies linearity, the linearity of modernity. And instead, it turns at Timbuktu and it moves a sinuous route through 9 countries, moving through many, many territories, eventually draining into the Atlantic Ocean, into the Niger Delta. Now, this river, which should have moved 240 kilometers from the ocean in an efficient world, now moves more than 4,140 kilometers in order to drain into the Atlantic Ocean. And in doing so, it becomes sluggish. In doing so, it becomes slow. In doing so, at times it's not moving down a gradient. Sometimes it is moving on level ground. Sometimes it's moving up a gradient. And in doing so, its sluggishness renders it a highly inefficient river. It doesn't follow the modern ways of efficiency. But what does this inefficiency yield? This inefficiency yields lakes larger than Belgium. This inefficiency yields one of the most biodiverse regions of the planet. This inefficiency yields a home for more than 40 different peoples. This inefficient river, which defies logic, which defies linearity, which defies efficiency, this inefficient river is highly effective at creating life. And so that is our Niger River. What do we mean beyond this metaphor? Beyond this metaphor, let's come into what it is that the rivers, whether it is the defiant Nile moving from south to north, whether it is the defiant Congo moving from the great pain into great power, whether it is the defiant Kasamambezi river that flows through this mighty curtain of water in the Swatunia, the smoke that thunders, or whether it is the high defiance of the Niger River, which does not follow any of the rules of modernity, nothing about efficiency, nothing about linearity. What is it telling us about? I'd say that these defined rivers, are defining Indigenous knowledge systems. They define Indigenous knowledge systems as those that have roots in a particular community, but are situated within a broader social context in which all life forms are a result of the interaction between social and spiritual relations. These defined rivers tell us about tacit knowledge, which is transmitted predominantly orally, but also through initiation, or via demonstration, or via observation. These knowledges are experiential rather than theoretical, and they are inherently interlinked with the understanding of the environment. And because of this, these knowledges are constantly adapting, and therefore they are dynamic, they are not stagnant. And this Indigenous knowledge systems follow the feminine principle. And yet, just like the feminine, they've been marginalized. Just like the feminine, they've been illegitimized. Just like the feminine, they have been invalidated. And they have been chained, and in this chaining, they have been subjected to ecocide. And as we've heard Tai Ji talk about, this ecocide also means that we're suffering from epistemicide. And so we're killing our knowledges in as much as we're killing our territories. And we're killing all of this because we're killing the feminine principle. So how do we decolonize this knowledge? I'd say we go back to the weaver. We learn how to weave tapestries. We learn how to weave with utmost precision. We learn how to build with strands of sustainability. And we learn how to consolidate when resources are few so that the majority can celebrate. And when we do this, we may turn the tide on the curriculum that we have all been a part of. And this will then take us into a divergence where we see that the world is actually a dichotomy. In this world, our education systems and the dominant paradigm is an education of the silo, where mathematics does not meet arts, where economics does not know the song of poetry, where hardcore engineering cannot breathe with the painter. We realize that this knowledge of the silo separates, it segregates, it extracts, and in that way it reduces. It's mechanistic, and it is rooted in deterministic materialism. It's rooted in reductionism. It yields and lauds objectivity. It is about being dualistic. It is monistic. It talks about natural selection, and it brings about dichotomy and binary opposition. But what if we were to find education systems as destiny instead? And for this, I'll go to the oracle. Now, on the left hand of the screen, we see ones and zeros, and those ones and zeros are moving through the computer. And it is precisely those ones and zeros that are allowing us to have this webinar today. It is the binary system upon which all our science and our communications is premised. On the right-hand side, we actually have a binary system as well. This is the Ifa oracle of the Yoruba people. But this system on the right-hand side does not only deal in base 2 like the system on the left. This system also upgrades to base 4 as a mathematical principle. And then it further upgrades to base 8 as a mathematical principle. And it further upgrades to base 16. So what looks like just a bunch of cowrie shells is actually a highly intricately and complex mathematical system that is based all the way up to base 16. And it is upon this complexity that oracles are able to see. And they are able to see through the cracks of time, and they're able to break those veils between the past, present, and the future in ways that we are able to see. That high science is not just about the ones and zeros that bring about modern technology, but high science is that which brings about the ones and zeros all the way to the 1s to 16s of ancient technology. And in this way, we still see that the indigenous systems follow the feminine principle. And for this, we would have to say, what would happen if our education, if progress began in the womb? And here I'll tell a story. There's an incredible artist here in South Africa. She's incredibly, her art just speaks volumes as it goes through multiple realms, multiple histories, multiple mysteries. And one day she said to me, Rutendo, what does your CV say? What does your curriculum vitae say? What does your resume say? It will probably credit your university that you went to. It might credit the jobs that you went to. It might credit the degrees that you have. But does it ever credit your original education? Does it ever credit the education of the womb? And here we have the education of the womb. But what would happen if we take that education into the education of the hut? Now, from an African perspective, we have yes, the normal gestation period of a human is 9 months. But from an African perspective, those 9 months are just the time that that education of the womb is being cemented. The minute that baby is birthed from that womb, they're taken into the depths of a hut, what we call the mhuku. And in this hut, they stay alone with their mother and then maybe 1 or 2 women who are looking after the mother. Because they recognize in African tradition that for that month after the child comes through the birth canal into this world that we're a part of, there's a lot that it still needs to assimilate. There's a lot from its innate immunity, its natural innate immunity that needs to adapt into the immunity that's able to withstand the pressures and the mysteries and the joys and the fears of the world. And then in the next month, the baby and the mother are taken into more of the passageway of the hut. And here it is that we're starting to understand that there is a world out there that you're going to engage with, but you're still here in the comfort of your mother's presence, without all of the noise of the outside world. In the 3rd month, the baby is then taken out into the balcony, or into the stoep, as we call it here. And here the baby is then introduced to the world, but the world is not yet allowed to touch the baby, because the baby still has to learn to interact with the world and with the multiple voices and the multiple energies and the multiple mysteries and the histories. And it is only after that 3rd month that the baby is then taken into the moonlight. And when the baby's eyes are able to meet the moon, the mother says, okay, that is your relative. And only when the baby is able to understand the rain upon it, is it able to know that it is part one with water. Only when the baby is able to know the fire that it is put over, does it know that it is one with the fires of the world. Only when it is grounded in the earth does the baby know that she or he is grounded in the earth, in the ground. And only when the baby is exposed to the wind do they know that ultimately everything is ephemeral. And so the education of the hut is 3 months after the 9 months, means that gestation from an African perspective is actually a whole year. It's a full 12 months. The solar cycle is how much we gestate. And from there, we're able to get into the education of the breast. And here in Southern Africa, our sacred grain is sorghum. And sorghum is actually called mabele. Mabele means breasts. Because sorghum is the grain that nourishes. It is the grain that is given to the mother when she first starts to breastfeed. And from there, it is able to yield and to grow and to flourish and to feed the nations. And so the education of the breasts should actually also be put into our curriculum vitae. And then, as I've said, there's the education of the moon, where the baby is able to perceive this being, the celestial being that is a companion of our planet, and know that I am that moon and the moon is me. And that moon is linked to the great waters of the sea. And those waters of the sea are linked to the amniotic waters that formed my journey in the womb. And from there, as I said, the baby is taken through the education of the elements, taken into the waters under the rain, is taken over the fires to feel the heat of the world, is taken deep into the earth in order to be grounded, and is taken into the wind to understand the ephemeral nature of life. And in this way, the baby knows that I am because the world is. I am because nature is. I am because I am nature. And from there, the baby is then taken into the education of the back. And here in Africa, a lot of women carry the babies on the back, because it is on the back that the baby is still able to perceive the heart of the mother, but yet able to perceive all that is happening around the mother as well. He or she is not bound to the mother's womb as he's been. He or she is starting to move into her as independence. And it is from the back that they listen to the mother's songs as she plows the fields that form the grains and the fruits and the vegetables that are going to feed the society. It is from the back that the baby is able to feel the heat of the sun or feel the raindrops. It is from the back that the baby is able to experience the totality of life, but appendaged to the mother or the grandmother. And here the baby then starts to acknowledge and to learn and to develop as a sentient being. And here we also have the education of the braid. I've spoken about the fractals before, and the weaver bird, which is weaving tapestries and weaving patterns of being. And by the same token, when the child grows, they then get braided, because as we braid the hair, the braids are weaving in the fractals of the cosmos. The braids are weaving in the patterns that are inherent in nature itself. And in weaving those into our headspace and into the sacred hair that we have, we're then able to understand life and understand that life is actually woven within who we are, and that sharpens what our mental capacity is, moving into our social capacity, our heart capacity, and our spiritual capacity. And in all of this, we have the education of the circle. The education of the circle reminds us that nothing is linear, in as much as the Niger River starts close to the ocean, but it moves in a semicircle in order to finally get into draining into the Atlantic Ocean. So it meets itself, because a circle is just a line that's seeking to meet itself. And that's why we sit in circles, we dance in circles, we breathe in circles. That's why we sing in circles from an African perspective. And finally, we have the education of the basket, where all those elements from the womb through the hut to the back, all of those elements are then woven into your sacred song, your sacred pattern, into the basket. And this basket is always mirrored back to you, because ultimately, this is your greatest teacher. When all of that is done, we may then move it into the pot. And here I've got, actually, it's my grandmother's pot. It's a pot that my grandmother made. And when my grandmother made this pot, she first went into nature with the grandchildren. And together they rummaged through the earth, that earth that the baby now knows is him or her. And they rummaged through the earth. And in rummaging through the earth, she is teaching ecology. In rummaging through the earth, she starts to teach about biology. She starts to teach about chemistry. And then she brings that earth together with water, and she starts to mold. And in that molding, there are principles of physics. And then she brings that which is molded onto the fire. And in there, she's teaching through song and through metaphor and through storytelling. She's teaching about the principles of physics, in what happens when these elements come together, the elements of earth, of water, of fire, and of air. And once it is molded, she then begins to decorate it and bringing in the arts. Once the decorations are done and the stories, the sacred stories are woven and are painted into this grandmother's pot, from there, it is then taken to hold water and to cook on a central fire around which everybody sits and tells stories, and the stories then go on from generation to generation. So this pot is actually a transdisciplinary tool. As opposed to the silo education of modernity, it merges everything into a single experiential mode of learning, where it is tactile in as much as it is mental, where we're weaving art with science, with spirituality, where we're moving from the past to the present to the future, where all of life and lifelessness is converged as one. And so all of this is a premise for Indigenous African cosmology. And I'll begin with Neter, what we talk about Neter. Now, in our Indigenous African cosmology, we talk about two realms of being. We have the subjective realm, and the subjective realm is the void, or the atom, where atom comes from. It is the no-thingness, not that nothing exists, but there's no thingness to it. And in this subjective realm, we then go into the objective realm, where we have consciousness and will, and we have energy and matter. And this consciousness and will and energy and matter moves into thoughts, emotions, and physical reality. And all of these two realms of being actually are conversed into something that we call Neter. Neter is the being that synthesizes and pervades life in both the subjective and the objective realm. And when we look closely at the word Neter, we start to see that, it means natura in Latin. It is about our essence. It is about being neutral, and it is ultimately about nature. So from an African perspective, nature is our ultimate supreme being. It is Neter. It is that which we may call God. And from Neter, we have Ntu. Ntu, which is the causative dynamic life force of power that is responsible for all of creation of Earth and in the universe. And this Ntu, that we call Ntu, is the subjective matter of the subjective realm of Neter. It is as intangible as it can be, but it is completely manifest in its intangibility. And therefore, we start with Ntu to introduce a humanizing principle, a feminizing principle, and this principle is the principle of Ubuntu. Here in Southern Africa, we say Umuntu, Umuntu Gabantu. In Lesotho, we say Mutuki, Mutuka Bantu. In Zimbabwe, we say Munu Munu Panevana. What we're saying is a person through other persons. But talking about persons, we're not just talking about humans, which is what people have tended to do to render Ubuntu to the Anthropocene. When we're speaking about persons, we're talking about those that are made of sound, person. We're talking about those that are the elements of nature. So persons are all the sentient manifestations of Ubuntu. And only when Ubuntu, Umuntu, Gumuntu, Gabantu, only when a person is a person through other persons can creation be. That is Ubuntu. And Ubuntu says, I am because we are. And I am because you are. I am because he is, because she is. I am because we are. I am because all that is, and all that is not, is not. Now, Ubuntu takes itself into four principles from a Bantu perspective. This Ubuntu, this cosmic manifesting force, manifests within reasoned beings. And these reasoned beings are the humans that we are. And here we talk about Muntu or Bantu, that Ubuntu manifests within the human realm. And then, but Ubuntu does not only live with the humans, Ubuntu also manifests within that which is acted upon by reasoned beings, with the things, and this is what we call Kintu or Bintu. Now, what is very interesting in African cosmology is that trees, as we see the tree over there, are not considered to be things. They're not considered to be Kintu or Bintu. They're considered to be Bantu. They're considered to be people. They're considered to be human, because they are able to take the past, present, and future from the roots, the trunk, to the branches, in as much as they're able to carry our ancestors into the present, those that walk today, into the descendants that are yet to come. And it is for this reason that when a person dies in old Africa, we plant a tree, because this tree is Muntu, the person's spirit lives on. But Ubuntu does not just live with persons and with things. Ubuntu also manifests between time and space. And this is the principle that we call Hantu. Now, African tradition has known, and African cosmology has known for millennia that time and space collapse into a single continuum. So here in Southern Africa, we have places that are called Ha Mulima or Ha Mujaji or Kwandebele. These prefixes denote a temporality and a locality, because they realize that time and space are collapsed into a single continuum. And this is something quantum physics has only started to discover in the past 150 years. Hantu. And finally, to manifest in that which is inanimate, that which is untouchable, that which is unmanifest. It also manifests in that which is in our emotions, that we cannot necessarily see with our naked eye or touch or taste, but which we can sense. And this is what we call Huntu. And so Ubuntu, when we speak about Ubuntu, Ubuntu is the ability for Ubuntu to manifest within humans, to manifest within all that humans interact with in Kintu, to manifest within time and space, and to manifest within the unmanifest itself. And that is Ubuntu. And only when we say there are we able to say Ubuntu is at one with the animate. Ubuntu is at one with the inanimate. Ubuntu is one with the cycles of time and cycles of space. And Ubuntu is one with the intangible. When we say we're with Ubuntu, we're able to understand that actually Ubuntu is the force in which being and beings coalesce. It is the basic essence that unifies the universe. It is the essence of life itself. Ubuntu is immanent. It is a spiritual force inside, in as much as it's transcendent, a spiritual force outside. Ubuntu is about interrelatedness. It's about interconnectedness. It's about interdependence between all spheres of existence. It is intrinsic as it is extrinsic. It is psychic and immaterial in as much as it's social and material. It denotes harmony and it denotes balance. This is Ubuntu. So Ubuntu is a natural, decolonizing, rehumanizing, re-Africanizing, re-feminizing intelligence, I would say. It is about interdependence, interconnectedness, and interrelatedness, and known by another term and by another name in other parts of Africa. It is also known as Ma'at or Mia or Ma, and this is often represented by a scale. in which one pan has a heart and the other pan has a feather. Because when we're truly living according to the principles of Ubuntu, according to the principles of interdependence, interconnectedness, and interrelatedness, our hearts are as light as a feather. Now, I'd like to introduce another principle, and this is a more reflexive principle. This is the principle of Sankofa. Now, Sankofa tells us to go back and fetch it. It is usually denoted as this bird. This bird is turned back on itself, and sometimes it has a seed in its mouth, and sometimes it has an egg in its mouth. And what this says is go back and fetch it. We need to look into the past so that we may understand how we became what we are in order to be able to move towards a better future. This is Sankofa. And this is a principle that is inherent to African cosmology, that it is important to learn from the past, because it is only in learning from the past that we're able to give and build the future. But when we start to look at it, we realize that it is not just about histories. It is not just about time. When we start to look deeply into Sankofa, we realize that Sankofa is actually the universal principle of feedback. And this our African ancestors denoted simply by a bird. This feedback system is found throughout nature. This feedback system is found in the sugar regulation systems of the body. This feedback loops are found in how we have homeostasis, or how we control temperature within our bodies. But these feedback loops of Sankofa, we also find in psychology. We also find in how we react according to an impulse that is presented to us. And this feedback loops we find in the market, in economics, in production, in sales. We find it also in the operational amplifier in engineering. We find feedback loops in the predator-prey cycle. We find feedback loops in the environmental cycles. We find feedback loops in Idai. Now, Idai was the largest, strongest, most deadly tropical storm in the Southern Hemisphere, which hit in 2019 in the Southern Hemisphere, causing irreparable damage in a place that is normally stable from these cyclone activities. What was really interesting was that this cyclone that caused so much destruction was given the name Idai. Now, Idai is a Shona word that means love, but not love as a noun, not love as something fanciful, not love as an emotion, love as a command, love as an injunction. Idai means you have the injunction to love. And so we start seeing through this that Sankofa actually speaks to systems theory. That Sankofa also speaks to both positive and negative feedback systems, systems thinking and systems doing, because this picture here is actually another symbol of Sankofa. On the one hand, we have the bird that is turning back on itself, and on the other hand, we have this, which looks very intriguingly similar to a heart, because our ancient ancestors understood that it is only through positive and negative feedback systems and loops that are inherent in the fullness of nature, in the fractals of the cosmos, that we may consider thinking about progress into the future. It is all interconnected. On the left-hand side, we have the Tai Ji dual, we have the yin-yang symbol, which tells us that there is always a little bit of yang in the yin, and yin begets yang as yang begets yin. And by the same token, on the right-hand side, we have an African shield, which also uses this principle of the interconnectedness and interdependence between that which is dark and that which is light. Everything is connected. Nothing can be separated. All is one in Ubuntu. And this, I believe, is where we can converge. This is where we can converge with indigenous ways of knowing. And here we've got a system called the Hakata. It is the divination tool in Zimbabwe and Botswana, which also uses base 16, and it also uses base 2 and base 4 and base 8. It is also a highly complex mathematical tool. And when we understand that this is actually scientific principles, these principles of Sankofa and principles of Ubuntu, then we start seeing that actually Ubuntu is actually a quantum science. When we look at the theory of relativity, then we can start to think of Hantu. When you look at particle wave duality in quantum physics, we can look at Ntu. When we look at the indivisibility of nature, we can look at Ma'at. When we look at a participatory universe, we can look at the interplay between Ma'at and Ntu. We can talk about S-matrix theory and the tree of life, chaos theory and indigenous healing, the binary code and indigenous oracles, probability and divination, the uncertainty principle and ritual. Ultimately, that indigenous knowledge is quantum theory. And I'll just quote a quantum theorist, David Bohm, who told us that the pervading or reductionist fragmentation of human consciousness is now preventing man or womankind from working together for the common good and even for survival. There's a need for an inclusive, a borderless paradigm stressing that both relativity theory and quantum theory are notions that imply that the undivided wholeness of the universe would provide a much more orderly way of considering the general nature of reality. Consciousness, says David Bohm, is the essential nature of the universe. Consciousness is Ntu, and it is pervaded by matter. It is pervaded by nature. Science means spirituality. Ubuntu meets deep ecology, where we see cosmological, biological, and social networks able to work together, where we work with diversity as opposed to monocultures, where we speak of apart from nature, where we speak to sustainable ecosystems, and where we're therefore able to create sustainable communities and economies. But can these worlds merge? Can science merge with indigenous knowledge? Can the dominant paradigm move with those that came from behind with the principle of Sankofa? For this, I'll bring that we then have to bring on indigenous ways of thinking. We have to understand that we need to see everything with the eye of an eagle, or the eye of the hawk, or the eye of the falcon. And in this way, we need to look at everything through the eyes of segregation. Segregation from an African perspective is the ability to see the outer differences between that which may be inwardly similar. But by the same process, we still need to also use the principle of congregation. Congregation is the ability to see the outer similarities between that which may be inwardly different. And then analysis from an African perspective is the ability to see the inner differences between that which may be outwardly similar. And then synthesis is the ability to see the inner similarities between that which may be outwardly different. And when we're able to see through segregation, through congregation, through analysis, and through synthesis, we see through the eye of an eagle, we see through the eye of the falcon, we see through the eye of the hawk, we have circumspection. And circumspection is what is necessary to have true progress towards a restorative whole. So I'd like to say, let's follow the way of the weaver. And when we follow the way of the weaver, progress can only come through when we enlarge the space. When what we've heard the other wonderful women speak about before, when we bring the others whose marginalized voices are not brought into the table, into our common and everyday paradigm, we enlarge the space. And in enlarging, we make space for everybody to be a part of this planet. And this is a lesson that we learn from the weaver when they come together as social weavers under limited resources, ultimately showing that the idea of limited resources is but an illusion. And when we do this, then we're able to get into diversity. We're able to understand that there's an ecology of knowledges, there's an ecology of ways of knowing, there's an ecology of ways of being, there's an ecology of ways of doing. And when we're able to move into the incredible diversity of that ecology, then we may start to talk about progress, and then we may start to talk about restoration of the whole. And we can only do this when we have multi-epistemological competence, and when we're able to move between multiple epistemologies, when we're able to understand the dominant paradigm, when we're able to understand where artificial intelligence is going, but able to withhold it and say, but you will never be the innate knowledge that is rooted in our indigenous ancient wisdoms. You know, when we're able to merge the sciences with the spiritualities and the arts, when we're able to bring health together across the paradigm, be it that which understands that health is about alignment, or that which thinks that health is simply about getting rid of symptoms, or that which knows that health is actually about bringing us into a place of harmony. This is what would bring us into multi-epistemological competence. And for that, we need to have a trans-disciplinary view of life. And when we look at Indigenous knowledge systems, just like my grandmother's pot, they are inherently transdisciplinary, because with this one pot, she is touching multiple disciplines across the spectrum in order to be able to yield children that are able to step into the world and create a future. And for this, we need cognitive justice. Cognitive justice is the right of different traditional knowledges to coexist without duress. And when we have cognitive justice, only then can we start imagining and reimagining and co-imagining a restorative future. And once we do this, then we can integrate all of knowledge based on destiny, where we understand that the ones and zeros that are allowing us to have this conversation today through our technological systems, our modern technological systems, actually pale in comparison to the ones and zeros, as well as the base 4, base 8, and base 16 of our indigenous oracular systems. Then, when we are able to throw the bones, as we call it here, and understand what our destinies are, then we're truly able to make progress towards a restorative future. When we do this, we're able to take our indigenous knowledges from the periphery and bring them to the core. When we do this, we're able to see that IKS, or indigenous knowledges, are a deep science or a deep dive into science, which is knowledge, or the love of knowledge. We're able to see that knowledge is that which is lived versus that which is theorized about. We're able to know that all is connected, all is relational. We're all a part of a continuum. And in this, we're able to create systems of sustainability beyond the Anthropocene. We're able to move beyond the walls and ask the WWH questions: who, what, where, when, why, and how. We're able to bring forth a universality that says, I am because we are, Ubuntu. And in this, we're able to go back into that moment of co-creation. And when we go into a moment of co-creation, then we yield to Sankofa. And Sankofa then becomes the great ostrich of Ubuntu, of Ma'at. And from this, that ostrich then transforms into Benu, into the phoenix, that is able to rise from the ashes and bring forth that future. And from our First Nations people of Southern Africa, they tell us that a dream is not a dream until it is shared by the entire community. And when we're able to share these dreams together, then we can move towards true progress and restoration of the whole. And when we're able to do this, then we're able to come forth from a transformed, inclusive, pluriversal feminine principle. Then we become the agents that are actively building the future, and then become those that are bringing the whole with the fractals of the universe. Ashe, thank you.
Wow. Rutendo, that was a very powerful, insightful, and inspiring talk and presentation. And I can at least speak for myself. I thought those slides that you used worked really well together with all that you shared. And lots of very appreciative comments here. Wow, amazing, wow, thank you, beautiful, and so forth. So even though you can't see people, we are all here following every word you're saying and excited. And very soulful, someone says, your poetic language, yeah, which we all appreciate, which I've had the privilege of listening to before. And so I'm so glad we got the chance for more people to hear what you had to say. And of course, lots of people will be watching this afterwards as a recording. So we do have some questions, and I'm sure there will be more unfolding. So just to everybody, I've written it several times, but you can, if you have questions, do write them in the Q&A box, and we've got about 35 minutes, so that's a good chunk of time. So we're going to pick your brain a bit more, Rutendo. There's a whole string here, and some of them also have people also sharing from their own experience. So starting here with Alice Grossman, I think is from Switzerland, and she's mentioning that Switzerland, although having been a colonizing power and obviously a very both industrial and modern country, still have elements of pre-Christian rites, and you could say elements of European indigenous cultures. And she's saying like that resembles other indigenous cultures, like wearing costumes and wooden masks and to chase away bad spirits or burn the winter, which is a big thing for us in the north. And her question here is, do you think that the legal principle is based on a precedence of the masculine?
The current legal principles? I
think she's referring to the current legal, yeah.
Okay. I think I'd like to maybe premise that with, I quoted David Bohm, but he was very good friends with another David, quantum physicist called David Peat. And David Peat, who I had the privilege of interacting with, he used to talk about how in Europe was not always as it was, as it is now. And he took it back to before the 13th century. Before the 13th century, in general, everybody assumed that they were midwives to nature. And by being a midwife, that is an inherently feminine principle, that all of us are here specifically to be midwives of nature. But then something happened in the 13th century. What happened in the 13th century is that there was the introduction of an innovation called the clock. And the clock became this principle that was now able to quantify and to control time. And it came as opposed to the natural flow of nature, which is, it moves in cycles, and we've got the moon, which moves like the cycles of the woman's womb. We've got the sun. The sun actually moves with the cycles of testosterone, actually. And we've got all of that flow. Suddenly we now have incremental discrete seconds, 60 of them, that are fitted into a minute, and then we've got 1 minute that's fitted into an hour, and then we've got we've got that fitted into a day, and that's fitted into a year. And suddenly time became so controlled, and that we started being able to waste it. We started being able to own it. We started being able to to control it, and we're forever chasing it. And yet the feminine way is timeless. And so I would say that, and of course, I mean, I don't have a great history about the burning of the witches and the like. A lot of, I mean, kind of the killing of the feminine principle, of the principle that completely understood the cycles. And by feminine, we're not talking about women. We're just talking about those that understand the cycles, the cycles inherent in the universe. I would say that became, it took on patriarchy, and through taking on patriarchy, then favored the masculine over the feminine, and therefore we get this distorted way of extraction, of colonization, and of not understanding that ultimately everything is about interconnectedness, interrelatedness, and interdependence. So back to David Peat, ultimately he says there's an ancient memory in all of us, even those that are the worst colonizers in our histories. If we go back to pre-clock time, when we were in flow time, we will find that ultimately everything is according to our indigenous principles, because indigeneity is present in all of us.
Thank you, Rutendo. I've heard you talk about that clock before, and it's something I never thought of myself. So and I'm sure that's true for a lot of us. next one is from Cheryl, who's thanking you for this eye-opening talk. And I think she's got a question that will work very well with your background in engineering. She said, could you talk more about how the uncertainty principle, which is mentioned, is it in the vein of Schrödinger's cat electron wave versus particle concepts and rituals? How are they related? This is Chinese to me. Maybe you understand.
So wave versus particles, or waves and particles existing as one. I guess it's let me just talk about ritual, and I'll give an example. I was in a place of great conflict last month, actually, a very, very deep conflict, conflict in ideals, conflict in epistemologies, conflict in ways of being, ways of knowing, ways of doing. And this conflict was actually fracturing communities apart, the communities that we were in apart. And in our traditions, so one of the initiation paths I've taken is called the path of the Sangoma. And a Sangoma is a traditional healer in Southern Africa. But Sangoma, what does Sangoma mean? A Sangoma means Sa is of, it's like per, it's like of. One who is of the song, one who is of the dance, one who is of the drum. And when you are of the song, the dance, and the drum, then you're able to dance in such a way that you're able to fracture the principles of reality and shift reality. And so the only way we were able to move that incredible conflict that was bringing the communities apart, that was fracturing the communities, was to actually go into the realms of dance, of trance dance, where you get into the drum has a particular resonance. That resonance is resonant with the spirit and a particular spirit, and that particular spirit is the spirit that is able to dissipate the conflict. And in a 5-minute dance, that conflict was dissipated at community-wide scale. And so what is happening at the quantum level, that is creating that fracturing, and that is creating that converging simply through bringing song, dance, drum into a space. And it is actually able to have social implications. It's actually able to have economic implications. It's actually able to have health implications. It is actually able to positively impact the body, the somatic self, as it is able to impact the psyche, as it is able to impact the spirit as well. And so I think that is when we can then start speaking about, is it about the particles, or is it about the waves, or is it where they interweave, or is it about something even more quantum than the quantum itself?
Thank you, Rutendo. There are a number of questions here from, more questions from Alex, but I'm just gonna jump to Lynn first. We'll get back to your questions, Alice. So Lynn is, well, your whole talk has resonated with her, and she's asking, I think, the question that so many of us have. And of course, we don't expect you to be able to deliver the exact answers, but what do you think are the next steps when, she says, when key individuals, but I think also the society as a whole, are acting in the exact opposite ways? I imagine she's referring to the destructive progress that we are seeing, the continued colonization of our minds, and all that you've spoken about. So that's one question. What do you think we should do? What are our next steps? And she also has a second question. Do you think there are similarities between Chinese culture and African culture that has enabled China to so effectively extract wealth from Africa? So those are actually two questions.
Let me start with the second question. I've been a student of Chinese martial arts for a long time, so I have a little bit of a peek into Chinese ways of thinking and being. And obviously I'm coming from an African background. And there are many places where they do interweave, and there are many places where they are diametrically opposite. But what I'm aware of, I think it is, there was a great prince from Benin, who somebody asked him, you know, if you as Africans had the access to the Fa is the divination principle in voodoo, you know, did you not see colonization coming, you know? And and in seeing colonization coming, why were you not able to stop it with all of your great oracle systems? And why were you able to allow the colonization to come and extract in the way that it has done? And his response was, speaking from a voodoo perspective, was that voodoo is about love, first and foremost. It is about a love that says, I am because you are. And that which I see in you and that which you do is that which is in me as well. And so it's not a popular view of colonization, but it's a view that that which we think is the greatest destruction is that which is a reminder for us to upgrade ourselves into a greater place of construction. And so and then just on another way of answering that question, I know that before the opening up in China, they studied everybody very, 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 very deeply, and they came to understand very deeply how different cultures operate. And I mean, my mother is from Lesotho, and growing up very young, it's the most obscure, tiny little country. Somewhere far away, you'll find a Chinese person speaking perfect Sesotho, who's found themselves into this very obscure country, in the middle of nowhere, because they have studied the world. And I think we could learn by studying others in the same way, as studying that which we think is the other, and realizing that that which we think is the other is just a mirror of who I am. Which is exactly my segue into the first question is, yes, they are acting in the exact opposite ways, and maybe not a popular stance. Those exact opposite ways are there to push against whatever we feel is progress or wholeness or restoration or regeneration, in order that we may develop it better. So I know certainly in some Eastern traditions, they say there is no bad and there is no good. There's just the way of the left and the way of the right. And the way of the left is there to allow the way of the right to better itself. And once the way of the right better itself, it moves the way of the left to better itself. And so we are constantly being tested, just like every action has an equal and opposite reaction. We're constantly being tested. And perhaps it is not so much about looking into them that are acting in the opposite ways, but looking into how we are inadvertently perpetuating that which we think we are seeking to oppose. And from a quantum perspective, what I've experienced, certainly from an Indigenous perspective, is simply by being, just like that Sangoma dance, simply by being, you're able to impact the fractals, and you're able to impact the veil of reality, such that those who are acting in opposite ways may be touched enough to find their own restoration and to find their own way of healing towards the benefit of the whole.
So I'd like to add just a little comment to that question about what has enabled China to extract wealth from Africa. So, well, certainly the global economic system is enabling that, not just China, but other countries and above all private corporations. But I think in Africa, well, certainly that wealth extraction is enabled by the free trade treaties that are basically forcing open countries for foreign investment, for foreign extraction, usually by private companies. And in China, that's often a mix between state-owned and private companies. And of course, that goes hand in hand with the whole historical debt that Africa has found itself in, very much due to the extraction through colonization. And this is a process, in my view, of neo-colonization, but usually by private corporations, often coming from very wealthy countries. No? So I just wanted to add that part to it. So Avis is asking if you could share or explain a bit about Indigenous way of punishment, or of wrongdoing. What was the traditional way, I think, Indigenous way of dealing with misdemeanors in the social field, particularly?
Yeah. So one of the ways is that if somebody has a misdemeanor or digresses from the social norms, they seek to find what is it that they're missing, as opposed to what is it that they've done wrong. And the most extreme, and what they might do in some of the cultures is they'll bring that person into a circle, because the circles are so important, and they would dance to, the clowns would come to dance to extract or to allow to surface that which is truly at the heart of that misdemeanor. So the misdemeanor is more of a symptom than an actual action itself. As an extreme example, Credo Mutwa, the great seer of Africa, talked about how when you had a serial killer, for example, the old elders would say, what is it that he has forgotten? What is it that's missing that is causing them to want to kill? And then they would find that actually what he has lost is the meaning of life. And so they would take this serial killer into a room adjacent to a woman in labor and allow him to listen through the whole of the labor period, so that he can start to remember an innate memory that was lost in him, which is the memory of coming into life from the mother's womb. And then once the baby was born, then they would give that baby to the healer, so that he could smell, touch, feel what life, new life, looks like. And according to Baba Credo Mutwa, that was so effective in being able to switch that misdemeanor, because that memory of life, the innate nature, the innate knowing of life, was suddenly reborn. So from an Indigenous African perspective, it's and across the board in different cosmologies, different mythologies, it's never to punish, but more to remind you of what you have forgotten. And what you have forgotten is normally your destiny, and so what we seek to do is, how do we bring you closer to your destiny?
Oh, I was muted. Thank you so much. Alice is asking if you're aware of the syntropic farming, which is considered, it combines, well, organic regenerative farming with traditional knowledge and practices. Is that something you're familiar with?
I mean, I'm familiar with the term, but I know certainly from kind of growing up with my grandmother and or those in Zimbabwe. It's that kind of the principles of syntropic farming, or the principles of, say, permaculture, are the principles that were followed for millennia, by our ancestors. My great-grandmother, living high up in the cold, snowy mountains of Lesotho, was able to generate tropical fruits and plants, because she understood about that interdependence, interconnectedness, and interrelatedness between different forms of diversity and how they collaborate with each other. So it's not necessarily labeled as such. It's just lived. It's just lived.
We also have a question here, which is about, have you written any books? And we want to hear more from you.
The books are coming. The books were for the second half of my life. So the second half of my life is coming. So the books are coming.
Very good. We're looking forward to that. So yeah, you got people waiting here.
Awesome.
That's good to know. Good. Also, yeah, so Alice is also asking if she can introduce you to the San medicine man of South Africa, Q7 Beckett. This is not something, of course, you have to say yes to now, but you know now that that's on offer.
Okay, awesome.
Okay, and so yeah, Cheryl here again. Could you comment on how Indigenous knowledge can help with modern psychological burdens? You spoke about segregation, congregation, analysis, the whole thing. It makes her think of trauma, PTSD, healing, and post-traumatic growth. It seems like that the paradigm that you're mentioning could be helpful with that.
Interestingly, from many Indigenous traditions, if somebody presents as different, and something that we might call psychologically different, or present as though they have something that looks like a psychiatric illness, the elders would celebrate, because they would recognize that this is someone who has very deep connection to the realms of the spirit, and to those that have walked before and those that are yet to come. This is one who is able to cross across the boundaries of this three-dimensional world that we have been forced to understand is the only thing that exists. And then, instead of being treated with medication, etc., they're treated with initiation. They undergo all sorts of rites and rituals, some of them which are just to reconnect them with themselves and with their destiny, some of which are to reconnect them with their ancestors, and some of them which are to reconnect them with the greater calling, whether it is a calling to be a healer or whatever it is. And so, a lot of our initiatory processes are actually processes that are seeking to heal this, which may seem to be psychological. And actually, I can give a personal example of myself, is that I was actually put through 5 years of psychiatric treatment, none of which worked, by the way. Until eventually the psychiatrists, and I was put on every single kind of drug you can imagine, and every combination, and multiple maximum dosage and above maximum dosages, and nothing would work. And eventually one day the psychiatrist came to me and he said, "I've spoiled you for the past 5 years. You never had a psychiatric illness. You just have a calling to be a healer." And that is what we find a lot of here, is that so many people that present in that way are carrying not only their own traumas, that's why they're presenting that, but they're also carrying, in as much as they're able to touch the veil of that which is unseen, they're also carrying the traumas of that which is unseen. And in one example I can give is a principle called Ngozi from Zimbabwe, where you have, say for instance, my great-great-grandfather killed your great-great-grandfather, Anya. And I then started displaying what seems to be psychiatric illness and schizophrenia and split personality and, whatever it is that I may be, psychotic. What they then find is that actually it is the spirit of your great-great-grandfather that has come seeking reconciliation in me, and then I have to go through my own healing and my own initiatory processes, and through that I'm able to do retrospective reconciliation between our great-great-grandparents. And so we are always healing across time and space, because time is not linear from an African perspective. It is like those that picture I had earlier of the cycles and spirals of time.
Wow. Well, I also have some questions of my own, but I am not sure that we'll get to them because they keep coming, and which is so great to see that how much your talk is inspiring here. So we've got Mimo Tushimura, who's I think fascinated by the language that you choose to use to talk about these things, and just wondered if you could say a little bit about the world is dichotomy. Do you mean that the world is an entanglement?
The world wants us to see either or all the time. The world, not the world in total, but the dominant paradigm is so trapped in either or, and it has forgotten both and, that and that is the dichotomy, and so certainly an indigenous paradigm it's both and, the other does not exist because the other is me, and therefore everything is interconnected, it is interrelated, and it is interdependent as well.
Okay.
And I guess intertwined, interwoven, entangled into being then can then weave into the both and as opposed to the either or.
And Huarkin, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name right. It says that all that you are saying, Rutendo, resonates very much with him, but then he looks around at his surroundings like so many of us do, urban, in this case semi-urban, and wonder at the feeling of the parallels you mentioned. And what his question is, what are the best ways to honor and redirect, in this case, his work within systems and communities to more fully embody the Ubuntu and the Entu wisdom? I mean, so basically, I think it's a question that many of us have. What can we do where we live now? Most of us are caught within this, entrapped within this modern economy. How can we bring indigenous wisdom into that?
I guess if we ask the question to everything we see in our surroundings, I am because you are, what would that do? Because that immediately means I'm going to interact differently with you. I'm going to interact differently with this computer if I realize that I am because this computer is. It's allowing me to have this conversation at the moment. It allows me to interact differently with I mean, here in South Africa, there's very high levels of violent crime, and the violent crime is propagated by the fact that this is the most unequal society in the world. So it's quite understandable that it would breed that kind of violent crime. What would happen if I see, and what happens in South Africa is that you have a very affluent neighborhood, and it's separated by a slum, by one road, and it was designed in that way so that the people in the slum could work for the people in the affluent area. What would happen if I see that starving man that has broken into my house as just an extension of who I am, and how will I shift the paradigm in that way? And we actually had an experience here where an affluent white person decided to go and just spend with their family a month in a township, and suddenly they understood, I am because you are. And by the same token, some CEOs were taken to spend a day in Robben Island, where Nelson Mandela was incarcerated, and treated in the way that the segregated way that the prisoners were treated, and suddenly they realize, oh, I am because you are. So I think that question is so simple, but it completely changes, how we're going to interact with anything around us. What would it mean if we changed in that way, and how does it impact me, in a quantum way as well?
So we are moving towards the end, but we still have a few questions, but we might not be able to take all of them. So if we don't, you could type it into, sorry, everybody, type it into the chat, and we may be able to deal with them afterwards. Because the chat will be recorded and the Q&A box is not recorded. But Patricia here is from Venezuela, or she's born in Venezuela and has African ancestors that have suffered heavily during colonization, heavily sexually. And she has been, she says, held and released, dancing and honoring their pain. What is your healing experience in this regard? What has worked for you?
So dance, in an indigenous African perspective, kind of traditional dance is always very multi-layered, and across the board, so like, for instance, we have a lot of mating dances that, once children go through their initiations into becoming young adults, and then they're taught mating dances, which allow them to get in touch with sexual energy without needing to act on it in a way that is harmful. And unfortunately, a lot of that has been lost, unfortunately, through colonization, through the church, it's deemed this as immoral, etc. And yet it was actually serving society. And I remember an elder saying to me, there was a time when he was growing up, when kind of women and men could sleep in the same room and nothing ever happened. There was never rape, there was never teenage pregnancies, and he doesn't understand what's shifted in the world. And I think it's precisely those initiatory practices, and also, apart from initiatory practices, the rites of passage that have been lost, and also, as I say, kind of those practices like the types of dance that you engage in. What I have found in terms of the question that is being asked is, yes, there's different types of healing dances that are attributed particularly to a particular archetype, and it is an archetype that is specifically a feminine archetype that is related to water. So water helps a lot, and it's an archetype that is particularly linked with the principle of sexuality. So it's about dancing that archetype in to restore a healthy sexuality within, and then that helps to heal the woundings of traumatic sexualities from without and from beyond. But a lot of somatic work as well is, I found, helps in healing some of that. And of course, we carry our ancestors' pain as well, and it's about learning to be healed of those traumas as well.
Rutendo, before we end, I want to ask you to share a little bit about those networks that you are involved in. You co-founded the Ancient Wisdom Africa, and you're part of something called Earthrise Collective, and there's quite a lot of other, as I understand, indigenous knowledge holders, activists involved in that too. And I think it'd be so lovely if you could share a little bit about that.
Yes, so with Ancient Wisdom Africa, really what we're seeking to do is to really bring forth the incredible, beautiful, deep knowledge and wisdom of Africa in a way that the world may be able to meet it, but not extract from it, and not commodify it, and not appropriate it. A lot of our knowledges have been hidden. A lot of them have been lost because of modernity, because the elders have died, etc. And so we're seeking to restore the African knowledge systems in that way. With Earthrise Collective, it is a collective that has got three premises. It's ancient wisdom, activism, and alternatives. So it is a collective of hardcore, old school activists, indigenous knowledge holders from all over the world, thought leaders, all of whom are trying to find alternative ways, and I don't even like the word alternative, but regenerative ways of meeting the crises of today. And the basic question is, what happens if our ancient wisdom fuels our activisms? What will the activism look like when it is fueled? And with that, we have a huge network from those in the Amazon to those in Sami in the northern, in the north, northern Europe, to Benin, you name it, and we've got such an incredible community that is really able to show that biodiversity or unity in diversity. Linked with that is also Earth Elders, which is another conglomeration of indigenous knowledge holders from around the world. And we have lots of fun because everybody speaks different languages. We have to figure out how to communicate. And it's really interesting finding that when your base language is Neter, is nature, actually the language of the tongue becomes less important. And I think, and in that way, we've really been able to start weaving a cosmovision, we think, that is inclusive and that takes us back into what we're speaking about in this topic,